Thank you, Professor Edith Weisgal. And what we're going to do is to show some way of how we work with a deprived population, and we'll have an example of how we do it and also a life example. And it is my honor to invite here Professor Gideon Kunda from the Department of Labor Studies. And Gideon works with foreign workers and immigrants, and actually will present the way he works with the most deprived population to help them scale up. How should I call it? Come here, Gideon, thank you.
Good afternoon. I might be a little confused, but according to the program, I should be on in 1 hour. So what you're going to see is a bit, never mind, it's a bit of an improvisation. But let me describe what I'm doing. Yeah? I teach in the Department of Labor Studies by training and discipline. I'm an anthropologist, and for most of my career, my professional career, I studied what you might call high-end, post-industrial organizations, labor-intense organizations, high-tech in Israel and outside, from an anthropological and ethnographic point of view, looking at the gaps between the self-proclaimed progress and then whatever high-tech claims itself to be, and the realities on the ground for the people involved in that way of life. That's what I built my career on. But about 6 years ago, I reached a point in my career, call it a midlife crisis, where I felt that things in my country, things in my city, things in my university, and things in my department were not acceptable anymore. Where the country is going, perhaps you're reading the news, things have not improved. The city too. I was born in a part of Tel Aviv, which is known as South Tel Aviv, and I grew up there till my parents made it out of there when I was 14. For those of you who are not from this country, it might be interesting to take a look at what goes on the other side of the city. This is Ramat Aviv, this is North Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv historically grew from south to north, and as you move up north, you find increasing affluence and increasing European orientation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the city also grew east to west, on the boundary between the historical Tel Aviv and historical Jaffa. For those of you who know the city, for those of you who don't, you might take a walk from the Yemenite quarter, Shuk HaKarmel, east to Shabazi. Some of you might have seen Neve Tzedek, which is a study in gentrification, now forgotten. Then you go to Florentine, then you go to Neve Sha'anan, then you go to Shapira, Kiryat Shalom, you reach the Ayalon, you cross to Shmat HaTikva, you go all the way to Kfar Shalem, Salameh. This is an east-west boundary, which historically, as I said, was the no man's land between Jewish Tel Aviv and Arab Jaffa. It was a site of war. In many ways, it still is. But for one reason or another, this became a site of, after the war, after, you know what happened in the war, but the neighborhoods, even before the war, but after the war, became sites of poverty, of lower class, of, from the Israeli point of view, people who were more oriented to, you might call a Middle Eastern culture, a traditional culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in many ways, this is Israel's first periphery, what we call the peripheria. I grew up there, and I spent many years there, and I kept going back there, and I discovered that the city was changing. And I discovered in that area many, many problems that I thought captured the essence of the problems in our society, and particularly around the questions, and I include Jaffa in this, and neighborhoods like Ajame. The question of who are we? Who are we? Who's a citizen? How does one get to be a citizen? What are the rights of citizens? Who are admitted into our society and who are excluded? Who are going to be deported and who are going to be placed somewhere in the periphery without access to too much of what the state can give, and ultimately might get labeled poverty and then get treated by social workers when they're lucky. So I decided to, and in Tel Aviv University at the same time, up here in North Tel Aviv, I began to feel, and this is not a criticism, it's a personal feeling, that this is not Tel Aviv Jaffa University, this is not Tel Aviv University, this is Ramat Aviv University. Seriously, built across the Yarkon, it's like a satellite floating over the city, like many universities. And I found myself despairing of teaching students who would prefer to go to India and Goa before they traveled south to South Tel Aviv, or looking at students while they were looking at their cell phones doing WhatsApps and seeing the eyes, or behind screens. I found this thing quite frustrating, and I decided to explore for myself. So I decided to become a researcher on these issues, but more than that, what you might call an activist. And I see the gap between activism and research as one that is overstated often. And I began wandering around my city, from Ajameh and Jaffa, where my grandfather landed, all the way to South Tel Aviv on the other side, where I was born and where I still have family. And I decided to get involved in these questions in different ways. I'll describe one of my involvements, which will lead to this question that I was asked to speak about, which was the fact that South Tel Aviv increasingly became known as a neighborhood of the foreigners. The first wave of foreigners were foreign workers who were brought here to replace the first wave of foreign workers, who were the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, who were offered work, hoping that that would cause them to relinquish their national aspirations. Once the Intifada came, and Israel was already addicted to foreign work, and the Iron Curtain went down on our labor markets, we needed a new wave of foreign workers, and we began to import foreign workers the way many countries are doing at the same time, with all the social consequences, which I don't have to get into, but foreign workers who came illegally and became illegal. Foreign workers who followed the first or most robust rule in sociology, which is as follows. Foreign workers do not go home. They don't go home. People come, they stay, whether it's Turks in Berlin or whatever. So the first wave gravitated, legally or illegally, to South Tel Aviv, which was poor, which was open, which was warm-hearted, which could not say no, which was cheap for a variety of reasons, and began to create foreign, what you might call neighborhoods. Churches replaced synagogues, etc., etc., etc. And we came to see South Tel Aviv, particularly the neighborhoods that I'm going to be speaking about, as recognized as the foreigner neighborhood. Now, when people come, they not only work, and they not become half legal or illegal or fall into categories that no system is able to even place, whether it's a state or social work. They also have children, and children are born, and they learn the language, and they speak Hebrew, and they become acculturated while not being Jewish formally by any standard that the state recognizes. And I got involved first in the question of the children. What is the status? Can they stay here? On what basis? Why? Religion, Orthodox Judaism, language, culture, humanism. What is it? Why? What should we do with them? And I became a street-level worker and an activist as a way of learning. And then a major transformation in my life happened because I encountered a social work agency called Mesila, whom you might know. The mayor of Tel Aviv recognized that the neoliberal state placed this problem in their lap and then went away and then came back to recruit the votes of the disenfranchised people who were suffering from the consequences of their policy. So he created a social work agency with arm's length from the municipality. When it's convenient, he recognizes them. When it isn't, it doesn't. And social workers, my heart goes out to you. It's hard work. Good luck to you and God bless you. And often they wind up dealing with the poorest of the poor. And when you have disenfranchised people without citizenship, with fathers being deported and mothers staying on as single mothers, without status, without insurance, you get the worst of the worst of the worst of social situations. And of course, social workers gravitate then to work with the most disenfranchised. And you have 3 social workers for 30,000 people, you can imagine what goes on there. If anybody should get the Dan David Prize, it's them, but this is a different story. There's a lot of money going around yet, a lot of prizes. I want to think about that too. But they also have a model which is along the lines of what my previous speaker spoke about, getting involved in policy, getting involved with the leadership of the community, which is a very interesting model. You don't work directly with the suffering people, you try and generate the leadership there that you can work through them. Unfortunately, people don't have enough time for that because they pull down to the horrible things that happen in everyday life when you're in poverty, or serious poverty. So Mesila created a leadership training program for 15 people. This was still a wave of foreign workers before what's known as the refugees or the infiltrators or whatever you want to call them. Half Asian, half African. Illegal. One of them had a kid in the army already. Some were mixed marriages. The complexity is way more than any category system that you can read in the newspapers or in academic articles. And they created a 3-month leadership training program. People come at life and learn leadership. High-tech style. Time management, decision-making, all the things that leaders need to know. after 2 months of that, which they appreciated, they said to the organizer, you know what, we're leaders, but we don't know where the hell we are. Time management, with all due respect, that's not going to help us. We need to know where the hell, they said worse than it, where the hell we are. So the organizer, who knew me from the children's activity, said, I know somebody who can talk about that. And they invited me to give a talk to this group about where the hell we are. And I said, okay, I'll be happy to come. This is a way of learning, this is a way of intervening, this is a way of opening my mind, this is a way of meeting people. What's better than that? And I came at the evening, the Mesila, and there they were sitting in a circle, Muslims, Christians, pagans, atheists, I don't know, people from all over the place, who knew nothing about the country from the point of the big picture, but knew everything about everyday life here. In other words, the fragments of their knowledge were very much alive, but the frameworks came from other places. Some of them valid, some of them I don't know, but very interesting to me. And I asked them, what do you want to know? We have an hour and a half. Well, we want to know everything about the Jewish people in Israel, history, culture, politics, international relationships, and diplomacy, to start with. So I said, okay, I've come to the right place. I don't claim to know, but I can try and tell my story. And I don't know where you would start telling the story. I decided to start with the destruction of the Second Temple. I have other interests too. You know, territory, disenfranchisement, Judification, foreigners, Hordus, Nabat, everything, it's all there. And by the time I started speaking, and I got carried away, and I realized that these people were interested. For the first time, I was speaking to people who weren't looking at their cell phones. And by the time it was over, we got to the Middle Ages. But it was interesting. And what was interesting was also the young women who worked for Mesila were the products of our education system. We had no idea. They don't know anything. Not that whether I'm telling you the right story or not, they know nothing. They told me later, all we learn about is the Holocaust and Ezra and Nehemiah. Next year, Nehemiah and Ezra and the Holocaust. That's our history. So let's talk about some other stuff. So I came back the next week. I sort of took over the time management issue. The next week, we spoke about from the Middle Ages. You can imagine, you know, Jews, Faradim, Ashkenazim, here, there, York, pogromim, one long pogrom. And by the time it was over, we got to the Ottoman, the end of the Ottoman rule of Palestine, 1917. But then it got interesting because then he said, you know, Balfour Street where you work, Balfour is A, B, C, D, and E. And Allenby is a general who do. So some are taking those fragments of everyday experience and putting them in some kind of framework. It came to be something that stayed with me since then. And the next week I came back, I took over the class, that was the last week. 10 what? That's like 12 points. Yeah? 10 minutes. Okay. The next week we got to more interesting stuff, which is establishing the State of Israel, the Nakba, the new immigrants, the numbers on the arms, the parties, Mapai, Cherut, Begin, Etzel, the parliament, decision-making processes, the parties, the law of return, the Minister of the Interior, how it works, on the assumption these are things people need to know who consider themselves leaders because this is what they need to take into account when they fight for their rights, and they have rights by law, international and Israeli law. This is what they need to know. And what was over, I felt for the first time in many years that I was doing my job, which Tel Aviv University was paying for, even though Tel Aviv University might not appreciate it that much. But I felt it was significant to me. But it was over. And I went home that night and I said, wow, I've got to think about this. It's very sad, you know, we had some very interesting encounters, but it's over. What can I do? Write about it and publish a paper in 3 years? Shvilma, really. Or go and involve myself in these questions in a practical way. 2 weeks later, I got a phone call from the organizer. She said, we want to have a goodbye party for the group. They had an interesting experience. I said, sure. She said, come to, if you know Tel Aviv Rehov Lavanda 32, it's on the Ayalon. These are kind of industrial buildings, 4 stories. You come there. He said, we have a goodbye party. In the Knessia and the church, the pastor Tosh, who's an African pastor. And I went there, and you come to these buildings, this is South Tel Aviv, where I grew up. On the first floor, an illegal textile manufacturer from Gaza, God knows how he got there, living somewhere. The second floor, excuse me, a house of prostitution. The third floor, what's called a babysitterim. Babysitterim are kindergartens, illegal kindergartens for children who have not yet entered our educational system. They enter at the age of 4 or 5, and probably the only rights they get here from the educational system. We have a reasonably nice school. But until the age of 4, they go to babysitting, which means they stay in bed in a room, 70 kids, and at least 5 deaths in the last 2 years, I think. Horrible, horrible stuff. On the 4th floor, there was a church. I opened the door, maybe half the space, two flags of Congo and Israel, a gospel group, a pastor dressed in white, and 200 people sitting there, among whom I recognized the 10, 15 people I worked with, kids, all in their Sunday best. And in front, a little table like this, and white chairs, white plastic chairs in the rows, sitting there waiting for me. I said, what? He said, give a speech. I said, why? It's because this is our ceremony. And I stood behind the podium. On the podium, there were 15 certificates that looked like BAs, very fancy, and said, graduated with distinction from the Masila Leadership Training Program, Professor Gideon Kunda, Tel Aviv University. So I gave a little speech, and I handed them out, and they came up to the podium, and I shook hands, and they held up the pictures. These are worthless documents, except they are worthwhile in the minds of people. And the kids took pictures, and we shook hands, and I sat down, and that's it. And I went home. Now, as an anthropologist, I know that this is a formative moment, because in our research process, when you're surprised, that is a moment of interpretation. And the big question is, maybe the only creative question in social science is, what does this mean? What is this an example of? What can we say about it? I wasn't expecting this. Why am I surprised? What does this mean? And I began to tell myself what it means to me is these people live in a vacuum, created by the state, enforced by the municipality and by society. On the one side, the deportation police, on the other side, the regular police, and we know what that means. Social workers, some do-gooders from North Tel Aviv, and free soup. And they work illegally in the labor market, and they work 12, 15, 18 hours a day with very few rights, and even those are not necessarily enforced. That's the reality. And in this mess, people came from all over the world to better themselves. Who knows why they came here? They created a university. The content was the lecture that I'd given, and the ceremony was the kind of ritual that we have here every year, except without a tikva, which is also part of our funny ceremonies. And I said to myself, wow, here's an opportunity. For me, an opportunity to do something with my time as a researcher, activist, as a citizen, as Gideon Kunda. And for them, let's try and do something together, and as a kind of an experiment, as a kind of an ethnography, as a kind of active ethnography. And I proposed to the group, let's not, since we're all together, let's do something together. Let's hang out. Let's continue this leadership training, whatever that means, but take it as we call it a practicum, or some kind of applied process. Let's create a university, or whatever let's create a place for studying. And we started meeting and talking. And that established another part of my activity I joined the group. I'm a privileged outsider because I'm a citizen, because I'm upper middle class, because I have tenure. But I'm not ashamed to say that. But I joined the group of people who are the leaders. It's tricky because it's easy to say empowerment, but when people are empowered, first of all, it means I'm giving power. That's not it. People take power. When they take power, they do all kinds of weird stuff. It's not easy to do empowerment. But here was a group that was managing it, and I joined to bring what I could with my theories, which were changing anyway. And we started talking, what should we do? Okay, go out and find out what people want to study. So they went out, came back. What do they want to study? Computers and Hebrew, for good reasons. Because some of the kids speak Hebrew, because there's an alienation, because Hebrew is a language of the place, because you need Hebrew in order to fight for your rights, such as they are. Computers, that's another language, fantasy of a language. So we started, okay, let's have a computer class. I can get computers from Amdocs. I got 23, what they consider garbage, and I found a teacher. This is my daughter, who was 22 at the time, and she's that kind of person. And they advertised the class, and they said, okay, when? Night, because people finish working at 7 o'clock, at 7 o'clock. Bring your kids, because there's nowhere to put them. Basic computers. Handed out flyers in different languages. And on Tuesday night, outside, at the church, and we agreed to pay the pastor 1,200 shekel for the whole period, and charge people 100 shekel for a semester. And that was the deal. This was the decision of the group, for those who can pay, and people can't pay. And the night that it started, there were about 300 people outside around the block. It looked like a new product, an Apple product in New York, people waiting overnight. But there was an interesting atmosphere. There was a sense of euphoria. People were laughing. Something had happened there. Because, depression, which is what you find over there, is anger turned inward. That's what it is, that's depression. And when you have no horizon, you have no hope. You're just caught up in a cycle of poverty, or what you call it. But when there's a moment, whether it's another class or next week or something that one can do, the energy gets released, and it turned into a euphoric class. A few things happened. One person said to me, for the first time, I'm not embarrassed. They give out free food here. That was later on. Marak Levinsky. The nice people from North Tel Aviv give us knedlach and it's good to feed hungry people. It's wonderful. But you know what? It's embarrassing for me. I don't want your food. Honestly, I can find food in the garbage. Tell me something else. Where can a person learn? That's what I need to know. Because to be human is to learn. That's what it means. And that was a motto, slogan that stayed with me. But people began to study. They turned out a few things. First, not everybody wanted to learn double-click and open a file. Some people had a master's in math, except they were working in Nikayon. Other people wanted to study HTML. Other people had home computers and they're already doing stuff. Other people wanted video editing. So we started upgrading the classes. And then the module began to develop from semester to semester. We began to establish a model. It's managed by the leadership group. I'm a participant. 1 minute, well, it's a long story. Okay, 2 minutes maybe. Okay. Leadership group. The teachers are volunteers. They decide the classes, Hebrew, because you have a right to speak. Language is yours. Let's start with that. And if you know what kushi lech mipo means, we can explain where that comes from, but you understand the context and how to use it and what to say. What's in kupat cholim, the mishtara. Okay. How about child development? Let's have somebody from the social psychologist teach us Piaget and Erikson, but let's hear about your theories. Let's talk about the child rearing. Let's have a class in journalism. Let's have a class in photography, because everybody has this. But let's do the following principle. Let's document the documenters, because it's legitimate to document poor people, by definition. People still call me up from the university now, Kunda, you got a few poor people for me to write about? That's the model. Now, why don't you document people with their rituals in Kikar Rabin and the old people we take care of and stuff like that? So we had a photography class, which led to all kinds of things. Video editing, journalism. And from semester to semester, for the last 6 years, it's grown to the point we have about 18 classes, ranging from theory to practice, including a new group is most interesting now. It's sewing, and they're building a social business, which will also be profit generating. So we have this class. After a while, we couldn't stay in the church anymore, and this was an illegal organization. I had the money under my mattress. We moved to the central bus station, which is another thing one should, if you're not from this country, you should go there to see, because this is a study in institutional violence, to build a huge, unnecessary bus station in the middle of a thriving neighborhood, and then tell us that this is in order to create something between Switzerland and Shara Ir Batanach and Beit Vad Lechachamim. And of course, we failed immediately, and like a vacuum, it sucked in all our reality. So who we are is what goes on inside the bus station. You should take a walk around there. Everything's there, including my organization, but all kinds of things. So we got somewhere in the back rooms over there, we have a campus. And then we joined up with some other organizations, became formalized. We have what's called an Amuta, an NGO, that also deals with kids. We have a library in Levinsky Park in 14 languages. We have a Sudanese theater. We have all these things. So the organization exists and it's thriving. We have about 200, depends, between 150, 200 students. A lot of them, later on the refugees came. And that's a whole different story. But they joined the organization from Eritrea and from Sudan. I began to teach Hebrew and Arabic and to also show people what the connections are between the languages. And of course, when the government started sending people to Cholot, which is a detention center in the Negev, we lost students and tried to work over there. Avi Mugrabi made a movie now, you should see, about the Cholot Center, without people, and it was based on a class he taught in our organization, because Avi came to me and said, give me some refugees and I'll make a movie. I said, no. Tell me what you can do for us. Come teach a class. Once you teach a class and you get to know people, then maybe they'll collaborate with you. That's the story. And he did that, and he made a wonderful movie. I saw it in Berlin. Except the Germans asked him at the end of the movie, so this is how you treat Ethiopian Jews. It's very interesting to encounter outside views. Now, university. This is what I do there. But it's very important for me to shape the university. Start reaching out to people in the university who are interested, to Social School of Social Work, to the law clinic, to other organizations in the university, to try and get people to come there. Because Tel Aviv University should not stay in Ramat Aviv if it wants to be Tel Aviv University. So I bring my students there. All my teaching is focused on this. You want to come study with Kunda? Seminar, a few rules. First of all, no more reading. You've read enough. No more Foucault and Baudrillard. You've had enough. Later. Come there, live there, establish a legitimate presence there, write about it in a convincing way, and then tell me what you think about it, what you learned, and why you feel and what it did to you. And they tell me, but that's not academic, Professor Kunda. That's when I'm shocked. So you're wrong. That's academic. That's academic. After that, when you've done that, you have something to say, then you go to the library and see who you need to speak to. And then you could do a master and a doctorate. But if you lost what is being trained out of you, the initial curiosity, and your own associations, and your own repertoire, then we have nothing to say. And a student said to me, she said, I told you, what should I say about this? I said, I don't know, what does it remind you of? She said, it reminds me of a song when my father was a labor activist, sang when I was 5 years old. I said, well, write it down. She said, why should I write it down? I said, because you thought about it. I said, but it's not interesting. I said, no, what you think about is interesting by definition, and that's the basis for interpretation. If it reminds you there's a reason, now let's think about what that means to you. So students come, some of them hopefully change their mind, some of them change patterns, some of them do interesting stuff, but at least I'm giving them the flavor of what I believe academia should be. And then now I'm in collaboration with, final word, with the Law Clinic, which is a wonderful organization which has the right philosophy, which is law is not just to train people to be tax lawyers for the elite. And to learn law, you have to learn through practice, like many professions, and at least do some good in the meanwhile, before you become a tax lawyer. So we have an effort to open a site for the law clinic in South Tel Aviv, and to bring other law clinics there, and people from the medical school, and use that as a basis, basis kidmi, I don't know how to say it, for the university's presence over there, which could then leverage in other ways, hopefully to shape the university. Unfortunately, that would cost about 20,000 shekels to rent. That's a lot of money. And maybe, I don't know if anybody from Dan Davidi or university, maybe you should ask yourself, I don't know what Dan David meant before he died, but maybe ask yourself if there's a way of reorienting these funds in a way that will be consistent with his vision, because it does not make sense, honestly, to look at the amounts of money. With all due respect, Israel should not be giving Nobel Prizes, really. Or some Nobel Prizes, but there's a balance. When you get up here, I'll stop talking.
When you start talking money, I will go up in the...
I think it's something to think about.
Thank you very much. On, I think it was Wednesday, we had a dinner with the President's Circle in Kolbo Shalom in the south. And as I went back home to Rishon, I lost my way, and I found myself in South Tel Aviv, and it looked like a deserted place with Sudan people around, and suddenly I wasn't sure where I was. Just to give you, and I'll do that